My name is Nora, and I am 34 years old. I work as a senior forensic actuary for a federal defense contractor. Numbers have always made sense to me. They follow rules, they balance out, they tell the truth when people lie. I thought my marriage to Cameron followed the same logical principles. I believed that if I invested my loyalty, my hard-earned money, and my heart, I would receive a stable and loving partnership in return. I was completely wrong. The illusion of my perfect life shattered on a Tuesday afternoon right on the shoulder of Interstate 95. Just an hour earlier, I had hugged my mother-in-law Beatrice and my sister-in-law Courtney at the airport departure curb. They were supposedly heading to Miami for a long weekend girls' trip. Beatrice had kissed my cheek, thanking me for paying for their first-class tickets. Courtney had complained about the early flight but hugged me anyway. I watched them walk through the sliding glass doors, feeling a genuine sense of warmth toward the family I had married into. I got back into my car and began the drive toward the military base where my office was located. I had a massive financial audit to finalize before the weekend. About 20 minutes into my drive, my phone rang through the car speakers. The caller ID showed Marta. Marta had been my housekeeper for 5 years. She was a quiet, observant woman who kept my home spotless and often left fresh-baked bread on the counter for me after her shifts. She rarely called me during work hours unless there was an absolute emergency. I tapped the screen to answer, expecting to hear that a pipe had burst or the alarm system had malfunctioned. Instead of her usual cheerful greeting, I heard a trembling whisper. "Nora, please do not go home today." Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her words. I merged into the slower lane, my heart picking up its pace. I asked her what was wrong and if she was safe. She took a ragged breath. "I am safe. I left through the back door when I heard them pulling into the driveway. You need to pull over right now and look at the living room security cameras. Do not go home." The line went dead. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Marta was not prone to dramatics. If she was terrified enough to sneak out the back door and call me at work, something was terribly wrong. I signaled and pulled my car onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. Cars whipped past me at 70 miles per hour, rocking my vehicle slightly with their wake. I put the car in park, picked up my phone, and opened the security application. A few months ago, I had installed a discreet camera in the living room because we had hired some new contractors to remodel the kitchen. Cameron knew about the camera originally, but I was sure he had forgotten it was there. I tapped the icon for the live feed. The video loaded, buffering for a second before the high-definition image of my living room appeared on the screen. What I saw made the air leave my lungs. The front door was wide open. My husband Cameron was standing in the entryway. But he was not alone. He was carrying a young, heavily pregnant woman over the threshold of our home. She was laughing, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Cameron looked happier than I had seen him in years. He kissed her deeply, setting her down gently on the expensive hardwood floors I had paid to install. I stared at the small screen, my brain refusing to process the images. I thought someone must be breaking in, or perhaps I was looking at the wrong camera feed. But then 2 more figures walked through the front door, dragging expensive designer luggage behind them. It was Beatrice and Courtney, the same 2 women I had just dropped off at the airport terminal less than an hour ago. They had not boarded a flight to Miami. They had simply waited for me to drive away, called Cameron, and had him pick them up. They were all in on it. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and the man I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with. The audio feed kicked in, bringing their voices directly into the silent cabin of my car. "Welcome to your new home, Bianca," Beatrice announced loudly. Her voice echoed in the spacious living room. She dropped her designer suitcase next to the sofa and looked around with obvious disgust. "Do not worry about Nora's tacky decor. We will throw it all out by tomorrow." The pregnant woman? Bianca smiled shyly and rubbed her large belly. "Are you sure she will not come back early?" She sounded nervous. "I do not want any drama before the baby arrives." Cameron wrapped his arm around Bianca's waist, pulling her close. I watched his hand rest protectively over her pregnant stomach, a gesture I had dreamed of experiencing myself for 6 years. We had spent thousands on fertility treatments that went nowhere, and here he was starting a family in our living room with a complete stranger. She is not coming back until late Friday night, Cameron promised her. You know how she is with her federal audits. She practically lives at the base when it is the end of the quarter. By the time she gets back, her things will be in storage. I am serving her the divorce papers on Friday evening. Courtney walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed wedding photo of Cameron and me. She tossed it casually into a nearby trash can. Thank God, Courtney laughed. I am so tired of pretending to like that trailer park accountant. She has the personality of a wet mop. I watched my sister-in-law, a woman whose college tuition I had helped pay off, mock my upbringing and my profession without a second thought. Beatrice nodded in agreement, opening my decorative cabinet. She was useful for a while. Her pristine credit score and that boring federal job were exactly what you needed to get those business loans approved. But now that your real estate firm is booming, you do not need her dragging you down. This house belongs to our real family now. The baby deserves a proper home. I watched as Courtney walked toward the hallway leading to our master bedroom. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a small velvet box. My heart stopped completely. It was the box containing my late grandmother's diamond necklace. It was the only thing I had left of her. Courtney pulled the delicate chain from the box and fastened it around her own neck. It looks much better on me anyway, she giggled. Plus, Cameron already drained the joint savings accounts this morning. She cannot even afford to fight us in court. She gets the debt and we get the fresh start. I sat in my car while the highway traffic rushed past me. I was completely, utterly silent. The absolute, ultimate betrayal was sinking deep into my bones. I took a slow, trembling breath and gripped the steering wheel. They thought they had won. They thought they destroyed me. They had no idea what was coming. I put the car in drive and pulled smoothly back onto the highway, keeping my speed exactly at the speed limit. Panic is the enemy of strategy, and right now I needed a clear head. I required a secure connection and a larger screen to truly assess the damage. 5 miles down the road, I pulled into the sprawling parking lot of a quiet suburban coffee shop, parking in the furthest corner facing a blank brick wall. I turned off the engine, reached over to the passenger seat, and grabbed my secure work laptop. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened the device and connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot. I pulled up the camera feed again, expanding the window to fill the entire screen, and turned the volume up to maximum. The hidden lens gave me a crystal clear view of the living room and the open kitchen. Cameron was standing by the island, popping the cork on a bottle of expensive champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. Beatrice and Courtney were lounging on my white leather sofas, treating the space like they had already claimed ownership. Bianca was running her hands over the kitchen countertops, admiring the imported marble I had spent months selecting and paying for. Cameron handed a crystal flute to his mother and another to his sister, then poured a glass of sparkling cider for Bianca. He raised his own glass high in the air. To new beginnings, he declared loudly. To leaving the dead weight behind and finally starting our real family. Beatrice clinked her glass against his with a sharp chime. I cannot wait until you are officially done with that woman. I am so tired of watching my son pretend to love a glorified calculator who buys off the rack clothing. She never understood our family values anyway. Bianca took a small sip of her cider, looking up at Cameron with wide, anxious eyes. Are you absolutely certain she cannot take the business in the divorce? I mean, she is an auditor for the government. What if she finds a way to ruin your real estate firm? She could dig up something we missed. Cameron threw his head back and laughed. It was a confident, arrogant sound that made the air in my car feel suffocatingly cold. Let her try, he scoffed, taking a long drink of champagne. She is a boring government drone who lives by the rules. She does not understand how real business works in the real world. I only married her because I needed her pristine credit score and her spotless federal background check to get my initial commercial loans approved. No bank was going to touch me with my previous financial history. She was the perfect stepping stone. I used her financial stability to build my luxury real estate portfolio. Now, the firm is booming. The loans are securely in the company name, and I do not need her dragging me down anymore. You and the baby are my future. She is just a bad investment I am finally liquidating. Courtney giggled from the couch, twirling my late grandmother's diamond necklace around her fingers. Well, you definitely liquidated her today. Have you checked the accounts again? I watched on the screen as Cameron walked over to the solid oak dining table and flipped open his personal laptop. He cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit he always displayed when he thought he was executing a clever maneuver. I am just making sure the final transfers cleared the system, he told the room, his eyes fixed on his screen. We cannot leave a single penny in the joint accounts before I serve her the papers on Friday. I want her completely boxed out so she has to accept whatever settlement I offer. My forensic training kicked in instantly, overriding any emotional shock. While Cameron stared at his screen on the video feed, I opened a new browser tab on my laptop. I logged into our primary banking portal, navigating through the multi-factor authentication prompts with practiced mechanical efficiency. We shared a massive high-yield savings account. It was the account where I had deposited years of my performance bonuses, my careful market investments, and the steady, substantial income from my federal defense contracts. We had built the balance up to exactly $450,000. It was supposed to be our safety net, the foundation for our future. The banking dashboard loaded slowly, the spinning icon mocking my rising anxiety. I clicked on the Joint Savings tab. The screen refreshed, displaying the bold black text. Available balance $0.00. I stared at the number, my eyes tracing the perfect, terrible circle of the zero. I refreshed the page, thinking it might be a display error. The number did not change. He had completely drained it. I clicked into the transaction history, my eyes scanning the detailed ledger. The records showed a rapid series of massive wire transfers initiated just an hour ago, moving the entire $450,000 into an external corporate account I did not recognize. He had timed it perfectly, knowing I would be driving down the highway and unable to check my phone for standard fraud alerts. He had stolen nearly $500,000 of my hard-earned money to fund his new life with his pregnant mistress and his greedy family. I sat back in my car seat, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on me. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking. Cameron had not just broken his vows, he had methodically planned to strip me of everything I had worked for, leaving me with nothing but the debts and the wreckage. He thought he had outsmarted a woman whose entire career was built on tracking hidden money and destroying financial criminals. It was a laughable miscalculation. I closed my eyes for exactly 5 seconds, allowing myself to feel the blinding rage and the profound grief of losing the future I had imagined. Then I opened my eyes and locked those useless emotions away. I went to work. Suddenly, a sharp ringing broke the silence in my car. My phone vibrated intensely against the center console. The caller ID flashed brightly, displaying a picture of Cameron smiling at me during our anniversary trip last year. I looked down at my phone, then looked back up at the laptop screen. On the live video feed, Cameron was holding his phone to his ear. He was smiling warmly at Bianca and holding his index finger to his lips, shushing the women in the room. He was staging his performance. I cleared my throat softly, forcing my heart rate to steady and my breathing to slow down. I needed to match his performance perfectly. I reached out, picked up the phone, and swiped the screen to accept the call. "Hey babe," Cameron said, his voice dripping with that warm, loving tone I had fallen for 10 years ago. "The house feels so empty without you and my mom here. I miss you already." I stared at him on the high-definition screen, sitting comfortably at my dining table, surrounded by the 3 women who were helping him dismantle my life piece by piece. I smiled, making absolutely sure the genuine warmth reached my vocal cords. "Miss you too, honey," I replied brightly. "I will be home on Friday before you know it." Cameron kept talking after my answer, filling the silence with the kind of harmless domestic details he used whenever he wanted to sound attentive. He told me he had picked up groceries, that his mother and Courtney were probably already boarding their flight, and that he planned to make my favorite pasta when I returned. On the camera feed, Beatrice covered her mouth to keep from laughing. Courtney leaned against the sofa, still wearing my grandmother's necklace, while Bianca rested one hand on Cameron's shoulder. Every lie arrived in the same warm voice he had used throughout our marriage. I let him perform. I asked whether he had remembered to water the herbs near the kitchen window. I reminded him that the dry cleaning needed to be collected before Friday. Then I casually mentioned that the quarter-end audit might keep me at the base later than expected. Cameron relaxed visibly on the screen. His shoulders dropped and he gave Bianca a confident wink. He believed he had gained more time. "Take all the time you need, babe," he said. "Do not worry about anything here. I have the house completely under control." The sentence almost made me laugh. Instead, I told him I loved him and waited for him to say it back. He did easily and without hesitation. That was the moment something inside me became perfectly still. The affair hurt. The stolen money enraged me. But hearing him use those words while his pregnant mistress stood inches away clarified the problem in a way numbers always did. Cameron was not confused. He was not trapped by circumstances. He was executing a plan. While he continued speaking, I used the secure capture function on my laptop to preserve the live video. The security application stored ordinary footage for only 30 days, and anyone with administrator access could delete it remotely. Cameron still knew the original household password. I created an encrypted export of the entire recording, including the audio timestamps, device identifiers, and login history. Then I generated a digital checksum that would prove the file had not been altered. One copy went to my protected work drive. A second went to a private evidence vault under a new password. A third was scheduled for automatic delivery to my attorney if my account went inactive for more than 24 hours. The procedure took less than 3 minutes. It was the same protocol I used when preserving evidence for a federal review. Cameron had spent years mocking my caution. Now it would preserve his confession. I opened the smart home control panel in another window. At 9:42 that morning, Cameron had used his personal code to disable the hallway motion sensors. At 10:11, Courtney had entered the master bedroom. At 10:16, the small safe inside my closet had been opened with Cameron's emergency key. The system showed that someone had also attempted to reset the front door administrator code. The attempt had failed because I had enabled dual authentication months earlier. I changed every access credential immediately. I removed Cameron's ability to delete camera footage, alter alarm settings, or unlock the document safe through the mobile application. I did not lock him out of the house. That would warn him. I simply converted his administrator profile into a monitored guest account. From that moment forward, every door he opened, every code he entered, and every device he touched would create a permanent record. Then I sent Marta a short encrypted message. "Are you somewhere safe?" Her reply came almost instantly. She was sitting in the parking lot of a pharmacy 3 miles from my neighborhood. She had left her purse and coat in the laundry room because she had been too frightened to retrieve them. I told her not to return to the house under any circumstances. I reserved a room for her at the hotel near the military base and arranged for the front desk to accept her without requiring payment. She tried to refuse, but I reminded her that Cameron had seen her car in our driveway. Until I understood how much he knew I wanted her protected. Before ending the message, Marta added one detail. She had heard Courtney ask Cameron whether he had found my passport and retirement statements. Cameron had answered that the passport was locked at my office, but the retirement documents were probably inside my desk. The information changed the shape of the threat. Emptying the joint account was not the end of his plan. It was the first step. I opened my credit monitoring portal and froze all new credit inquiries under my Social Security number. I revoked every authorized user attached to my personal cards. I changed the access codes for my payroll account, retirement plan, insurance policies, and medical records. Cameron had never shown interest in those systems before, but a person willing to steal $450,000 would not suddenly discover restraint. I also activated identity alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and instructed my retirement administrator that no distribution, beneficiary change, address change, or power of attorney request could be processed without an in-person verification and a separate security phrase. A notification appeared before I finished. Someone had requested a preliminary title report on our house 2 days earlier. The inquiry had come from a private bridge lender I had never used. I opened the attached record. The lender had asked whether the property carried sufficient equity to secure a short-term commercial obligation connected to Cameron's real estate company. No loan had appeared on the county ledger yet, but the inquiry proved he was exploring ways to turn our home into business cash without discussing it with me. I saved the record beside the camera footage and added a note with the exact time. My phone remained pressed to my ear. Cameron had moved from affectionate small talk to questions about my schedule. Would I be sleeping at the base? Did I need anything from the house? Was there any chance I might return Thursday instead of Friday? He disguised each question as concern, but the pattern was obvious. He was measuring the window in which he could move my possessions, complete the property transactions, and prepare the divorce papers. I gave him exactly what he wanted. The audit is worse than expected, I said with a tired sigh. I will probably stay near the base until Friday evening. I might even turn my phone off tonight so I can concentrate. On the screen, Cameron smiled. It was small and involuntary, but the camera captured it clearly. That sounds smart, he replied. Get some rest when you can. I opened a blank evidence log and began typing while he spoke. I recorded the names of everyone visible in the house, the words they had used, the necklace Courtney had taken, the account balance, and the questions Cameron asked about my return. I documented facts, not conclusions. Emotion could be challenged. A precise sequence of verifiable events could not. Then I forwarded the title inquiry and the preserved security file to a locked legal folder. I did not yet know how much of Cameron's company rested on hidden debt or stolen collateral. But if he believed I was helpless, he would keep moving quickly. Speed made arrogant people careless. Cameron finally told me he needed to return to a conference call. On the live feed, Bianca smiled and reached for him before he had even ended the conversation. I listened to his final promise that everything at home was perfectly normal. I thanked him, wished him luck with his imaginary meeting, and held the phone against my ear for one extra second as the line went silent. I placed my phone face down. Cameron believed the stolen $450,000 was my entire life savings. It was a reasonable assumption. I drove a sensible sedan, bought clothes at mid-tier stores, and never flashed jewelry. I lived exactly like the boring government worker he had just mocked. What my husband did not know was that 7 years ago, I worked as a junior auditor on a massive defense contract. I uncovered a severe overbilling scheme orchestrated by a federal contractor. I gathered evidence, submitted it, and testified. The settlement returned tens of millions to the government. Filing under the False Claims Act earned me a whistleblower reward. The payout was over $4 million. I knew sudden wealth could create unnecessary chaos. I hired an attorney and locked every penny of that reward into an ironclad blind trust. It was my true fortress, shielded from Cameron, completely protected from marital property laws, and entirely untouched. I let him manage the joint account because I believed we were building a life together. Now he had shown me exactly what kind of life he was building. I closed the banking window on my laptop and opened my secure federal terminal. As a senior forensic actuary, my job was to trace ghost accounts, unravel shell corporations, and follow money desperate people tried to hide. Cameron moving funds through his business accounts was child's play compared to the international schemes I untangled weekly. I entered the routing numbers from the wire transfers he initiated. My software bypassed commercial delays and pinged the receiving institution. I watched as the money landed in Cameron's primary corporate operating account. From there, he did not let it sit. He was rushing, making sloppy mistakes. I tracked the first outgoing transfer. He wired $150,000 directly to an elite country club outside city limits. I pulled up the club's public calendar and cross-referenced local permits. The memo attached to the transfer read simply, "Courtney Engagement Gala Deposit." He had stolen my salary to pay for his spoiled sister's lavish party. The same sister who was currently sitting on my couch, wearing my dead grandmother's diamond necklace and calling me a wet mop. I felt a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. I traced the remaining $300,000. He routed it through a holding company registered just last month. A quick property search revealed exactly what that holding company was purchasing. It was a luxury townhouse in a highly desirable neighborhood. The deed was pending, waiting for the cash to clear escrow. The secondary name listed on the purchase agreement was Bianca. He was using my money to buy a house for his mistress and unborn child. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. He wanted me to finance his new family while leaving me destitute and buried under shared debts during the divorce. I leaned back and stared at the data flowing across my screen. Cameron thought the money was safely secured in his corporate pipeline. He thought he was untouchable, but he had made a fatal error. By breaking up the original amount and pushing it into multiple external channels, to hide the source, he had tripped a specific financial threshold. I opened the reporting portal. I did not need to claim the money was stolen from me personally. That would require a police report, a messy divorce filing, and a drawn-out civil battle where he could hide assets. Instead, I used my credentials to file a formal suspicious activity report. I flagged his corporate accounts for suspicious structuring and potential wire fraud. When a federal auditor flags an account for structuring, the banking system does not ask questions. It acts. I pressed the enter key and submitted the report. Within seconds, the automated system at his commercial bank received the federal alert. I watched the status of his business accounts change on my tracing software. A bright red banner appeared across the digital ledger. The funds were instantly locked. The bank instituted a silent mandatory freeze on his entire corporate portfolio pending a federal review. The money he sent to the country club would bounce. The escrow payment for Bianca's new luxury townhouse would be rejected. He could not access a single dime, and the bank was prohibited from telling him why. He would wake up to a financial nightmare he could not control. I closed my laptop, packed it away in its protective case, and started the engine of my car. I drove to the military base, walked into my office, and completed my scheduled audit for the quarter with absolute focus. My colleagues noticed nothing different about me. I drank my coffee, attended my meetings, and performed my duties flawlessly. The rest of the week passed in a surreal, quiet blur. I did not call Cameron, and he did not call me, maintaining the illusion that we were both busy with our respective careers. I spent my evenings at a hotel near the base, eating takeout, and reviewing every single piece of financial documentation tied to our marriage. I gathered our tax returns and mortgage paperwork. I organized everything into neat color-coded folders. Friday evening finally arrived. The sky was painting itself in shades of bruised purple and deep orange as I drove the familiar route back to my neighborhood. I turned onto my street, the tires of my practical sedan crunching over the fallen leaves. I pulled into the driveway. Cameron's car was parked in its usual spot. There was no sign of Bianca's vehicle. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, walked up the front steps, and unlocked the front door. The house smelled of expensive vanilla candles and lemon wood polish. The entryway was spotless. I walked into the living room. The tacky decor Beatrice had complained about was still exactly where I had left it. The framed wedding photo was back on the mantel, sitting perfectly upright. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were sitting on the white leather sofas, sipping glasses of white wine. They looked up when I walked in. They were wearing sun-kissed fake tans, playing the part of women returning from a Miami vacation. "Nora, darling." Beatrice called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You are finally home. We missed you so much. The house was just too quiet without you." Courtney wrapped her arms around me in a hollow hug. She was not wearing my grandmother's necklace anymore. "Miami was amazing," she lied smoothly, stepping back and smiling. "But we are so glad to be back. Cameron is in the kitchen making dinner for all of us to celebrate you surviving your big federal audit." I looked past them into the kitchen. Cameron was standing by the stove stirring a pot of pasta sauce. He wore a crisp shirt and a loving smile. He looked exactly like the devoted husband he had been pretending to be for a decade. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked toward me with open arms. I let him hug and kiss me. I breathed in his familiar cologne, feeling the solid weight of him against me. He thought he had me completely trapped. He thought he held all the power. I looked over his shoulder at Beatrice and Courtney, offering them a tired, grateful smile. "I am so glad to be home," I said softly. "Let the games begin." The rest of Friday night and the entirety of Saturday required every ounce of self-control I possessed. I played the part of the exhausted but devoted wife perfectly. I unpacked my overnight bag, listened to Beatrice complain about the humidity in Miami, and nodded along as Courtney showed me photos of beaches she had supposedly visited. Cameron was excessively attentive. He rubbed my shoulders, asked about my audit, and poured my wine. Knowing what I knew, his touch made my skin crawl, but I leaned into it. I let him believe his performance was flawless. By Sunday evening, the atmosphere in the house had settled into its usual stifling routine. I offered to cook a traditional Sunday roast. The kitchen smelled of garlic, rosemary, and roasting beef. I moved between the island and the oven with practiced ease. Cameron sat at the counter typing on his laptop while his mother and sister occupied the living room. I chopped vegetables with a steady rhythm, watching my husband out of the corner of my eye. He seemed relaxed, unaware that his financial pipeline was absolutely frozen. When dinner was ready, we gathered around the large oak table in the formal dining room. I had set the table with our best china. Cameron poured a rich red wine into our glasses. He raised his glass to offer a toast, thanking me for a wonderful meal and praising my hard work during the week. I smiled and took a sip, letting the bitter taste wash over my tongue. As we began to eat, Beatrice did not waste any time. She cut a small piece of beef and pushed it around her plate with a heavy sigh. She looked across the table at me, her eyes narrowing with that familiar condescending glint. So Nora Beatrice began, her voice loud enough to command the room. "Tell us about this big federal audit of yours. I honestly do not know how you stand it, sitting at a desk all day staring at spreadsheets for the government. It sounds so terribly monotonous. Do you not ever wish you had a more exciting career? Something with prestige." I took a slow, deliberate bite of my dinner. I chewed and swallowed, maintaining a pleasant expression. "I actually find the work deeply satisfying," I replied smoothly. "Ensuring that public funds are managed correctly is an important responsibility." Beatrice let out a short, dismissive laugh. "I suppose someone has to do the boring paperwork. You work so many hours for a fixed government salary. You will never really build substantial wealth that way. Not like Cameron. Look at what my son has accomplished with his real estate firm. He is out there making massive deals, taking risks, and building a true empire." Cameron puffed out his chest slightly, looking incredibly pleased with himself. I let him enjoy the compliment. I did not point out that his entire real estate portfolio was built on my pristine credit, or that his initial commercial loans were secured solely because of my boring government salary. I simply smiled and nodded, playing the role of the supportive, untalented wife they needed me to be. She took a sip of her wine and shifted her focus, targeting the one vulnerability she knew would hurt the most. "It is just a shame that your job takes so much out of you," she continued, her tone dropping into a feigned, sickly sweet sympathy. "I was reading an article the other day about how high-stress environments can severely impact a woman's fertility. You have been trying for so long with absolutely no success." The dining room fell completely silent. The cruelty of her statement hung heavy in the air. For 6 years, I had endured painful injections, invasive procedures, and the crushing disappointment of failed fertility treatments. Cameron had held my hand through every negative test result. He knew exactly how much those failures had broken my heart. Yet he sat there cutting his steak, not saying a single word to defend me. "Maybe if you relaxed a little and quit that demanding job, your body would finally cooperate," Beatrice added cruelly. "Cameron deserves a family, Nora. A real family with children to carry on his legacy. It breaks my heart to see him deprived of that." I felt a sharp, familiar pain in my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. The irony of her words was almost poetic. She was sitting in my house, eating the food I had purchased, drinking the wine I had selected, and berating me for not giving her son a child. All while knowing perfectly well that her son was currently expecting a baby with a woman named Bianca. She was laying the psychological groundwork to justify his impending betrayal. I placed my fork down on the table with a soft clink. "I appreciate your concern, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. "We are exploring all of our options. Cameron and I both want what is best for our future." Courtney tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder and smiled brightly. "Well, at least we have something amazing to celebrate right now," Courtney announced, changing the subject with practiced ease. My engagement party is going to be the social event of the season. I was talking to the event coordinator at the country club today, and we finalized the menu. It is going to be absolutely perfect. I looked at my sister-in-law. That sounds very extravagant, I noted politely. The country club must require quite a substantial deposit. Courtney rolled her eyes at my practical question. Of course it does. But Cameron is taking care of everything. He is paying the entire venue fee and covering the catering costs through his company accounts. That is what happens when you have a brother who actually knows how to hustle and make real money. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes shining with greed and entitlement. Cameron is a natural businessman. His real estate empire is funding the whole party. He makes things happen. I looked at Cameron. He was smiling at his sister, soaking up her adoration. They genuinely believed their own lies. They had convinced themselves that my money was his money, that my stability was simply a resource for them to exploit. They viewed me solely as a useful utility. And now that they felt they had extracted all my value, they were eager to throw me away. It is incredibly generous of you, Cameron, I said softly, looking directly into his eyes. Business must be booming if you can afford to host such a lavish event. Did you finally secure that large federal housing contract you were hoping for? Cameron did not miss a beat. He looked right back at me and lied with absolute terrifying ease. Yes, actually. The contract came through late last week. I just want my little sister to have the night of her dreams. I smiled at him. I am so proud of you, I told him, matching his deception perfectly. We finished eating in relative peace, the conversation shifting to Courtney's wedding dress options. I took a bite of my dessert and waited. The trap had been set on Friday afternoon. Suddenly, a sharp, vibrating buzz broke the atmosphere in the room. Cameron's phone, sitting on the table next to his wineglass, illuminated brightly. He glanced down at the screen. His expression changed before he unlocked it. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. A thick sheen of sweat instantly appeared on his forehead. He grabbed his phone, his knuckles turning white, and stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He muttered a disjointed excuse about a minor emergency with one of his properties and practically ran out of the dining room. I knew exactly what that notification was. The elite country club had tried to run his corporate card for the massive floral deposit Courtney had bragged about, and the transaction had hit the federal freeze. I slowly stood up and began clearing the dessert plates, stacking them with quiet precision. Beatrice watched her son rush away, her brow furrowed in confusion, before she stood and followed me into the kitchen. The swinging door closed behind us, cutting us off from Courtney, who remained blissfully oblivious in the dining room. Beatrice cornered me by the sink. She dropped the loving mother-in-law act immediately. Her voice was sharp and urgent. She told me Cameron was experiencing a temporary cash flow issue because the government was taking too long to process the funding for his new federal contract. She demanded that I go to my bank tomorrow morning and take out a personal loan in my name to tide the family over. It was not a request. It was an order delivered with the absolute expectation that I would sacrifice my financial security to maintain their wealthy facade. I turned on the faucet, rinsed a plate, and looked her right in the eyes. I gave her a reassuring, compliant smile and told her I would look into the loan options first thing in the morning. She patted my arm, satisfied that her obedient, foolish daughter-in-law had fallen into line. The next morning, I took an approved personal day from the military base. Courtney had texted me at dawn, insisting that I accompany her to a highly exclusive bridal fitting downtown. She framed the invitation as a special bonding experience between sisters, but the reality was painfully obvious. She needed someone to carry her bags, hold her coffee, and act as a personal assistant while she played the role of a wealthy socialite. I agreed to go. I drove my practical sedan to the upscale shopping district, navigating through streets lined with designer storefronts. I parked in a garage and walked 2 blocks to the boutique. The exterior was entirely glass and polished brass, radiating an intimidating level of exclusivity. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into a showroom filled with pristine white silk and crystal chandeliers. Beatrice was already there, sipping sparkling water on a plush velvet sofa, while a sales associate hovered nervously nearby. Courtney emerged from a private dressing room a few minutes later, surrounded by layers of expensive tulle and imported silk. The boutique owner, a haughty woman with severe posture and a measuring tape draped elegantly around her neck, followed closely behind her. Courtney spun around in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirrors, admiring her reflection from every possible angle. She wore a custom gown with a price tag of $15,000. The dress was undeniably beautiful, but the person wearing it ruined the effect completely. She caught my eye in the mirror and let out a short, condescending laugh. She turned to the boutique owner and pointed a manicured finger at my conservative slacks and plain blouse. "You will have to excuse my sister-in-law," Courtney announced loudly, ensuring that the other wealthy clients in the showroom could hear every word. "She works for the government, so she does not really understand high fashion or luxury. We try to help her, but she insists on dressing like a substitute teacher." The boutique owner offered a tight, sympathetic smile, clearly accustomed to catering to the cruel whims of spoiled heiresses. Beatrice chimed in from the sofa, adding that it was a blessing. Cameron had a real estate empire to support the family. Otherwise, they would all be forced to live on federal pensions and shop at discount stores. I stood quietly near the fitting room door, holding Courtney's heavy designer purse and her iced coffee. I played the part flawlessly. I kept my head slightly bowed, offering meek smiles and nodding along with their insults. I let them build their egos on my back, knowing exactly how high they were climbing before the inevitable fall. After an hour of tedious alterations and endless demands, Courtney finally stepped out of the dress. She changed back into her street clothes and strutted over to the polished marble checkout counter. The boutique owner tapped the charges into a sleek tablet system. She informed Courtney that the total for the dress, the expedited alterations, and the custom veil came to $18,500. Courtney did not even blink. She reached into her purse, which I had just handed back to her, and pulled out a heavy metal corporate credit card with Cameron's company logo embossed on the front. She slapped the card onto the marble counter with an air of absolute superiority. The boutique owner inserted the chip into the card reader. We all stood in silence, waiting for the transaction to process. The machine beeped a sharp, unpleasant sound. A red light flashed across the small screen. The boutique owner frowned, pulling the card out and wiping the chip on her sleeve. She apologized, stating that the machine must be experiencing a glitch. She inserted the card a second time. The machine beeped again. The red light flashed again. The screen clearly displayed the word "declined." Courtney's confident smile faltered. She snatched the card back, her face flushing pink. "That is impossible," she snapped, glaring at the owner. "Run it manually. My brother owns half the real estate in this city. There is plenty of money on that card." The owner typed the numbers manually, her patience wearing thin. The machine beeped a third time. "Declined." The tension thickened as wealthy patrons started staring. Beatrice stood up, her jaw tight. She marched to the counter, pulled a platinum card from her wallet, and handed it over. "Just use this," Beatrice demanded. Cameron likely put a security hold on the corporate card to prevent fraud. The owner ran Beatrice's platinum card. The machine beeped loudly. "Declined." Beatrice's eyes went wide with shock. She demanded the owner try again, insisting her limit was unlimited. The owner ran the card again. "Declined." Panic set in. Courtney looked at her mother in horror, then whipped her head to look at me. Her arrogance melted away. "Nora," she pleaded, her voice frantic. "You have to pay for this. Just put it on your card. Cameron will reimburse you. Please, you cannot let them kick us out. It will ruin my reputation." Beatrice nodded vigorously, begging me to save them from public humiliation. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my plain wallet. I opened it slowly. I looked back up at Courtney. I let an apologetic smile touch my lips. "Oh," I said, making my voice sound small. "I would love to help you. But like you just told everyone, I am just a boring government worker. My limit is $500. You will have to put it back." I turned on my heel, pushed open the glass doors, and walked out into the sunshine. I left my mother-in-law and her daughter stranded and humiliated in front of high society. I drove straight to the military base after leaving the bridal boutique. The satisfaction of walking away from them was a quiet thrum in my chest, but I knew it was only a temporary victory. By refusing to pay for Courtney's dress and failing to secure the personal loan Beatrice demanded, I had essentially cut off their oxygen supply. Cameron was a man who thrived on control and financial fluidity. With his corporate accounts frozen by the federal hold and his access to my wallet firmly denied, his desperation would quickly morph into something dangerous. He would not just sit back and let his carefully constructed reality collapse around him. He would look for a way to forcefully extract what he needed from me. I spent the next 3 days at work meticulously reviewing my own security protocols and finalizing my audits. I stayed at a hotel near the base, avoiding the house and letting the tension stew. I wanted Cameron to feel the walls closing in. I wanted him to exhaust every legitimate avenue for cash so that he would be forced to make a reckless mistake. Wednesday evening rolled around, painting the suburban sky in muted shades of gray and heavy blue. It had been raining all afternoon, leaving a damp chill in the air. I decided it was time to go back to the house. I pulled my sedan into the driveway just after 6 o'clock. The house was completely dark from the outside, save for a single lamp glowing faintly through the living room curtains. Cameron's car was parked in the garage, but the driveway was otherwise empty. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was eerily silent. There was no smell of dinner cooking, no sound of the television playing in the background, no chatter from Beatrice or Courtney. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. I set my briefcase down by the console table and hung my coat on the rack. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the living room, my senses on high alert. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting on my white leather sofas were 2 uniformed police officers. They looked serious and uncomfortable, their hands resting near their utility belts. Cameron was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace, running his hands through his hair in a display of intense distress. Beatrice was huddled in the corner armchair, clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face a mask of absolute terror. "Nora," Cameron gasped, stopping his pacing as soon as he saw me. He rushed forward but stopped a few feet away, holding his hands up as if trying to placate a wild animal. "Thank God you are home. We have been so incredibly worried about you." I looked at the officers, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. The older officer stood up. He was a tall man with graying hair and a gentle but authoritative demeanor. "Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, folding my hands in front of me. "I am Nora Mitchell. What is going on here?" Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic sob from her armchair. "She is acting so cold," Beatrice wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Look at her eyes. She is completely detached from reality. Officer, I am telling you, she is a danger to herself and to all of us. She has not been sleeping. She wanders the house at night, muttering to herself. She threatened me yesterday with a kitchen knife." I stared at my mother-in-law. The sheer scale of her lie was astonishing. I had not even been in the house yesterday. But I did not raise my voice. I did not rush to defend myself. I knew exactly what they were doing. Cameron stepped closer to the officers, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "My wife has a very high-stress job working for the federal government," he explained, his voice thick with fake emotion. "She handles massive financial audits. The pressure has been building for months. She started acting paranoid a few weeks ago, accusing me of hiding money, claiming my family was plotting against her. It escalated this weekend. She vanished for days, and when she came back, she was completely unhinged." The younger officer, who had remained seated, pulled a small leather-bound notebook from his pocket. "Your husband called us today because he is deeply concerned for your safety, Mom," the younger officer said carefully. "He stated that you have been experiencing severe auditory hallucinations and violent mood swings." "I have been trying to get her psychiatric help," Cameron interrupted, holding up a small, worn notebook that I did not recognize. "But she refuses to go. She thinks all the doctors are part of a government conspiracy. I found this journal hidden in her home office today. She wrote down all these violent thoughts, terrible things about wanting to harm herself and wanting to burn this house to the ground. It breaks my heart to read it, but I had no choice but to call the authorities. I cannot let her hurt herself. Cameron handed the fabricated journal to the older officer. The officer flipped through the pages, his expression growing grim as he read the forged entries. I watched the scene unfold with a terrifying clarity. They were staging a psychological ambush. Because I had cut off their money supply and refused to take out a personal loan, Cameron was backed into a corner. His real estate firm was frozen, his mistress was demanding a new house, and his sister needed a wedding funded. He needed immediate unrestricted access to my wealth, specifically the federal retirement accounts he knew existed. If they could convince the police that I was having a psychotic break and posing a danger to myself and others, the officers could initiate an involuntary psychiatric hold. A 5150. They would drag me out of my own home and lock me in a hospital ward for 72 hours. During that time, Cameron would file emergency paperwork to have me declared legally incompetent. As my husband, he would be granted immediate power of attorney over my entire estate. He would gain the legal right to liquidate my assets, access my accounts, and strip me of everything I owned before I could even speak to a judge. It was a vicious, calculated trap designed to utterly destroy my autonomy and steal my financial resources in one swift move. Beatrice cried harder, burying her face in her hands. "Please, officer, you have to take her to the hospital. She needs heavy medication. She needs to be locked away where she cannot hurt anyone. I am terrified to even sleep in my own bedroom. She is completely insane." The older officer closed the fake journal and handed it back to Cameron. He turned his attention fully to me. His eyes were scanning my face, looking for any sign of erratic behavior. I gave him nothing. I stood perfectly still, my breathing slow. "Mrs. Mitchell," the older officer said, taking a slow step toward me. "We take these reports very seriously. We are going to need you to come with us to the hospital right now. Please step outside quietly." I did not move toward the front door. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not shed a single tear. I knew exactly how to handle liars. I looked at the older officer, maintaining a steady, open gaze. "Officer, I understand you are doing your job," I said, keeping my tone conversational and polite. "I am not going to cause trouble. But before I step outside or agree to a psychiatric evaluation, I would like to show you a piece of documentation. It is right here in my briefcase. I will move very slowly." Cameron stepped forward, his face contorted into a mask of exaggerated panic. "Officer, please do not let her open that bag," he pleaded, his voice rising in artificial hysteria. "You do not know what she has in there. She could have a weapon." I ignored my husband entirely. I kept my movements deliberate and visible as I walked the few short steps to the entryway table. I popped the brass latches on my leather briefcase. Inside was a thick manila folder. I pulled it out and turned back to face the officers. The older officer took the folder from my hands. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched his brow furrow as he processed the official seals and the heavy black text. "My name is Nora Mitchell," I explained, speaking clearly. "I am a senior forensic actuary for a federal defense contractor. I hold a Level 5 security clearance with the Department of Defense. To maintain that clearance, I am required to undergo rigorous and continuous psychological evaluations. The document you are holding is a comprehensive mental health assessment. It was conducted by a board-certified federal psychiatrist. If you look at the date at the bottom of the second page, you will see that I passed that evaluation with a flawless rating exactly 3 days ago." The room went completely dead silent. Beatrice stopped her fake sobbing, the crumpled tissue frozen halfway to her face. Cameron stood completely rigid by the fireplace, his mouth slightly open. He thought I just typed numbers into spreadsheets all day. He had no idea what a Level 5 clearance actually entailed. The older officer flipped to the second page, his eyes tracking the signature of the federal psychiatrist and the official government stamps. The younger officer leaned over to look at the paperwork, his posture relaxing as he read the official assessment. I am not suffering from auditory hallucinations, and I am certainly not a danger to myself or anyone else. I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. The journal my husband handed you is a complete fabrication. He wrote those entries himself today to create a false narrative. He called you here to initiate an involuntary psychiatric hold because he is desperately trying to have me declared legally incompetent. The older officer closed the folder and looked at Cameron. The sympathy that had been in the officer's eyes just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, hardened scrutiny. "Why would your husband want to do that, Mrs. Mitchell?" the officer asked, his tone shifting from cautious to deeply attentive. "Because," I said, turning my gaze to meet Cameron's terrified eyes, "my husband is currently the subject of an active investigation for federal wire fraud and identity theft. I uncovered the fact that he stole $450,000 from our joint accounts to fund his business ventures and support his pregnant mistress. When I discovered the theft, I flagged the transactions. His corporate accounts have been frozen under federal review. He is backed into a corner with zero access to capital. His only way out was to try and take control of my federal retirement accounts. To do that, he needed me locked in a hospital ward so he could file for emergency power of attorney. This display tonight is a retaliatory tactic by a cornered financial criminal." Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, clutching the armrest of the sofa. "Cameron," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine fear now. "What is she talking about? She is lying." Cameron shouted, his voice cracking under the sudden immense pressure. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is making all of this up to make me look bad. Do you not see what she is doing? This is exactly the kind of paranoid delusion I was talking about. You have to take her away." The older officer did not move toward me. Instead, he handed the manila folder back into my hands with a respectful nod. He turned to face Cameron, adjusting his duty belt. His expression was stern and unforgiving. "Mr. Mitchell," the officer said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative register, "I have been on the force for 22 years. I know a legitimate federal document when I see one. Your wife has provided absolute verifiable proof of her psychological stability from the Department of Defense. Her clearance level requires a standard of mental fitness that completely contradicts your entire story." The younger officer stepped up beside his partner, glaring at Cameron. "Do you have any idea how serious it is to file a false police report?" the younger officer demanded. "You called emergency services and attempted to misuse emergency psychiatric resources to settle a domestic financial dispute. That is a crime, sir. You are wasting city resources and attempting to weaponize the medical system against your spouse." Cameron opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He looked at his mother, but Beatrice had shrunk back into her chair, realizing the catastrophic mistake they had made. They had tried to outsmart the system, assuming their wealthy, respectable facade would blind the police to the truth. They had severely underestimated the armor I had built around myself. "We are leaving now," the older officer announced, his gaze sweeping over Cameron and Beatrice with absolute disgust. "If we are called back to this residence for another baseless claim, or if I find out you have attempted to harass your wife in any way, you will be leaving this house in handcuffs. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" Cameron swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw working frantically. He nodded once, unable to maintain eye contact with the men he had tried to manipulate. The officers turned to me. The older officer tipped his hat slightly. "Have a good evening, Mrs. Mitchell. If you feel unsafe in this house at any point, you call us directly. We have a record of this interaction now." "Thank you, officers," I replied softly. "I appreciate your professionalism. I will be perfectly fine." I walked them to the front door, standing on the porch as they stepped out into the damp, chilly evening air. I waited until they got into their patrol car and pulled out of the driveway, their headlights sweeping across the dark suburban street. Then I closed the front door and locked the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying click. I turned around to face the living room. Beatrice was staring at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. Cameron was still standing by the fireplace, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. The arrogant, untouchable real estate mogul had been completely dismantled in less than 15 minutes. I walked slowly across the living room floor, my heels clicking against the hardwood. I stopped when I was just inches away from my husband. He looked down at me, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. All the false bravado had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a desperate, terrified man who finally realized he was entirely out of his depth. I leaned in close, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I lowered my voice to a sharp, quiet whisper, making sure every single syllable carried the weight of an absolute promise. If you ever try to lock me in a cage again, I will make sure you die in one. Cameron stood frozen as my words hung in the air. The terrified expression on his face contorted into something vicious. The charming husband I had known melted away, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. Beatrice let out a pathetic whimper from the armchair, but Cameron ignored her. He glared at me, his chest heaving. "You think you are so smart?" Cameron spat, his voice dropping into a harsh sneer. "You think just because you have a federal badge that you hold all the cards. You are nothing but a glorified pencil pusher, Nora. I built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire while you were busy counting other people's money. You really think I would not have a contingency plan for someone like you?" He marched over to his leather briefcase near the console table, snapped the brass latches open, and pulled out a thick stack of printed papers. He marched back across the living room and threw the papers onto the glass coffee table between us. They landed with a heavy slap. I looked down. The top page bore the official seal of the Department of Defense, but the formatting was slightly wrong. It was a crude but visually intimidating forgery designed to create panic. "Those are financial ledgers," Cameron stated proudly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Doctored ledgers. They show a clear digital trail of you embezzling federal funds and routing them into offshore accounts. I paid a talented associate a lot of money to fabricate that evidence. If I send those documents to your commanding officer and the Federal Oversight Committee, your precious Level 5 clearance is gone. You will lose your job, your pension, and go to federal prison." I stared at the fake documents resting on the glass table. He was threatening me with the exact financial crime he was currently committing. The psychological projection was fascinating to witness. "So here is how this is going to work," Cameron continued, a sickeningly confident smirk returning to his face. "You are going to sign this house entirely over to me by tomorrow morning. You are going to walk away from the marriage, take the shared marital debt, and leave my business alone. If you do that, I will destroy those ledgers. If you fight me on this, I will completely ruin your life." I did not flinch. I did not yell. I simply looked at the forged papers, then looked up at my husband. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a quiet, amused sound that made the arrogant smirk vanish from his face instantly. "You really should have hired a much better forger," I said smoothly. "The agency seal on that document is outdated by 3 years, and you used the wrong departmental routing codes for my division. Send them wherever you want, Cameron. I am going to bed." I turned my back on him and walked up the stairs, locking the master bedroom door behind me. I slept incredibly well. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was dead quiet. Cameron and Beatrice had fled in the middle of the night, retreating to the luxury townhouse Cameron secured for his pregnant mistress, Bianca. That was fine with me. I needed them out of the way. I drove downtown, parked in a private garage, and took the elevator to the 40th floor of a sleek glass high-rise. Felix, my personal attorney and the administrator of my blind trust, was waiting for me in his corner office. Felix was a brilliant corporate litigator who specialized in destroying financial predators. We had been preparing for this exact morning for a week. "Good morning, Nora," Felix said, handing me a cup of black coffee as I took a seat across from his mahogany desk. "I see our mutual friend attempted a rather clumsy extortion play last night." "He threatened me with forged embezzlement records," I replied, taking a slow sip of the coffee. "He demanded the house. I think it is time we show him what a real legal consequence looks like. Let us pull the plug." Felix smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that made him exceptional at his job. He opened his laptop and tapped a few keys. The bridge loan Cameron took out against your house has officially defaulted due to the federal freeze on his corporate accounts, Felix explained. Because we intercepted that loan and you are the silent creditor through our holding company, we have the absolute legal right to execute an immediate commercial foreclosure on his collateral, and the collateral he offered to secure that predatory loan. I prompted, knowing the answer, but wanting to hear it out loud for my own satisfaction. He leveraged the commercial lease and the physical assets of his real estate firm, Felix confirmed. He bet his entire company on that high-interest loan, assuming he could pay it off quickly with the money he stole from your joint savings. I have already dispatched the commercial bailiffs to his headquarters. Across town in the upscale business district, Cameron arrived at his prestigious real estate office building. He was exhausted, angry, and desperate to access his frozen funds. But when he walked up to the heavy glass doors of his firm, his keycard did not work. The electronic reader flashed a solid red light. He pulled heavily on the brass handles, but the doors were chained shut from the inside. Taped to the center of the glass, directly over his elegant gold leaf company logo, was a bright orange commercial eviction and foreclosure notice. The notice stated that the premises, the accounts, and all physical assets inside the building had been legally seized by the primary creditor. His real estate empire was gone. The bustling, lucrative business he had built on the back of my pristine credit score had been legally erased before he had even finished his morning coffee. Cameron did exactly what I knew a coward would do. He panicked and ran. He needed a safe haven to regroup, so he drove across the city toward the upscale community where he had purchased the luxury townhouse for Bianca. He had promised her a beautiful life and needed her to validate his fractured ego. He pulled into the pristine driveway of the brick townhouse, walked up the paved walkway, and reached into his pocket for his keys. But he never put the key in the lock. Taped to the front door was another bright orange notice: immediate eviction. Cameron stared at the paper, his mind struggling to comprehend the words. The notice clearly stated the property was owned by a private holding company. His escrow payment had bounced when his corporate accounts were subjected to the federal freeze. The seller had immediately relisted the property. My shell company had swooped in and bought the property entirely in cash yesterday afternoon. I was now the legal owner of the townhouse he chose for his new family. As the owner, I served the occupants with an eviction notice for trespassing. Cameron stood on the immaculate porch, the crisp morning air chilling him to the bone. He had no office. He had no money. He had nowhere to go. The sanctuary he tried to build with my stolen money was now my property. He was completely, utterly trapped. For several seconds, Cameron did not move. He stood beneath the townhouse portico with one hand in his pocket while the orange eviction notice stirred against the door. He read it twice, as though the language might rearrange itself if he stared long enough. He tore the paper down and called the escrow officer. After 2 attempts, a compliance specialist answered. The purchase agreement had been terminated, she explained. The escrow funds had failed final verification, and because the transfer involved a corporate account under federal review, the seller had exercised the emergency cancellation clause. The property had already been sold to a cash buyer. I am the purchaser, Cameron shouted. My name is on the contract. Your name was associated with a failed transaction, the woman corrected. You have no legal interest in the property. She ended the call before he could threaten her. Cameron dialed the realtor who had spent weeks flattering him through private showings. The man's deference was gone. He said the brokerage had received notice of the federal restriction and could not communicate further without counsel. When Cameron insisted the freeze was a clerical mistake, the realtor answered coldly, "Then correct it through your attorneys." The silence on the porch deepened. Through the front windows, Cameron could see the townhouse was empty. The furniture Bianca had selected had never been delivered. The nursery existed only in unpaid invoices. He pressed the doorbell anyway. No one answered. His phone rang. Bianca appeared on a video call from inside a parked car, her eyes swollen from crying. 2 suitcases were visible behind her. She demanded to know why the escrow company had called, why the realtor had stopped answering, and why private security had refused her entry. Cameron adopted the confident tone he used with nervous investors. He said a bank technician had marked several transfers for review and promised the house would be restored by evening. His lawyers were already handling it. Bianca did not believe him. "You said the money was cleared," she replied. "You said Nora could not touch any of it. She cannot." Cameron snapped. Then he softened his voice. "This has nothing to do with Nora." Bianca turned the camera toward the suitcases. Her landlord had rented her apartment to someone else because Cameron promised she would move into the townhouse. She needed money for a hotel prenatal appointments and the furniture deposits he had asked her to place on her own cards. Cameron opened his banking application. His checking account held less than $2,000. He attempted transfers from 3 business accounts. Each produced the same red warning: transaction restricted. Bianca watched his expression change. "You are broke," she whispered. "I am experiencing a liquidity interruption," he said. "There is a difference." She ended the call. A message from his office manager appeared. Employees were outside the headquarters. Commercial enforcement officers had inventoried the computer's files, artwork, and vehicles. Payroll had failed. Agents were demanding their commissions. She wanted to know whether the staff should go home permanently. Cameron ordered her to enter through the service door and recover the server backups. She told him the locks had been changed and a bailiff was inside. The company's outside accountant had also issued a preservation notice instructing employees not to remove or alter records. "That accountant works for me," Cameron shouted. "Not anymore," she replied. He resigned this morning. 2 major clients had suspended their projects and requested audits. One investor had contacted the Financial Crimes Unit. Rumors were spreading that Cameron had used unauthorized transfers and overlapping collateral. Cameron called his commercial bank. After 20 minutes of recorded music, a risk officer stated that every account connected to his taxpayer identification number was restricted pending review. When Cameron demanded access to his personal funds, the officer cited the guarantees he had signed to support his commercial loans. Any linked account could be frozen if the bank suspected fraud or unlawful movement of funds. Cameron threatened a lawsuit. The officer gave him the address of the legal department and disconnected. He tried his credit cards. One rejected a cash advance. Another had been suspended. A third required identity documents that would expose the investigation. He looked toward his luxury car, briefly considering a sale, then remembered it was leased through the company and listed as secured collateral. A dark sedan slowed at the curb. Cameron stiffened, expecting agents. Instead, a delivery driver stepped out carrying an envelope embossed with the country club logo. Inside was a formal demand. The remaining balance for Courtney's engagement gala had to be settled in certified funds before noon the next day. The corporate card had been declined. Without payment, the club would cancel the event and notify the vendors. Cameron called the event director. He reminded her how much business his family brought to the club and promised a wire by afternoon. She said the board would accept only cash, a cashier's check, or verified funds from an unrelated institution. "My sister's guests include half the banking community in this city," Cameron said. "Do you understand what canceling this event will do to your reputation? Do you understand what an unpaid event will do to yours?" She hung up. Genuine panic overtook him. The townhouse, the office, and the gala were stages on which Cameron proved he was powerful. If Courtney's party collapsed in front of her wealthy fiancée Beatrice's friends and his investors, every remaining relationship would collapse with it. He called 3 private lenders. The first declined as soon as he gave his name. The second requested audited statements and proof that his assets were free of liens. The third quoted an impossible interest rate, a polite way of saying Cameron had become untouchable. He then called the attorney who had drafted most of his commercial agreements. The attorney answered only long enough to state that the firm had identified a conflict and was withdrawing from representation. Cameron demanded an explanation. The attorney reminded him that several documents now under review contained signatures and asset disclosures the firm had never verified. Until independent counsel examined those records, no one at the firm would speak for him. "You drafted those contracts," Cameron said. "We drafted documents based on information you certified as accurate," the attorney replied. If that certification was false, the exposure belongs to you. The call ended. Cameron stared at the phone in disbelief. Lawyers, bankers, and employees were not merely failing to rescue him. They were creating distance before the investigation reached them. He scrolled past bankers, developers, and attorneys who had once answered on the first ring. Most now sent him to voicemail. A few replied that they had been advised not to communicate with him. His network had transformed into a wall of closed doors before lunchtime. The eviction notice remained crumpled in his fist. He smoothed it against a stone column and read the purchaser's name again. It was an anonymous holding company with no recognizable officers and an address belonging to a registration service. Whoever had bought the townhouse had moved with extraordinary speed and had known exactly when the escrow payment would fail. For one brief second, Cameron thought of me. Then he rejected the possibility. In his mind, I was still the obedient government employee sitting behind a desk at the military base, unaware that my life had been divided among him, Bianca, Beatrice, and Courtney. He could not accept that I might be the person closing every exit. He sat on the cold stone step, the orange notice spread across his knees. Morning traffic continued beyond the gates of the development, indifferent to his collapse. For the first time, he had no office to return to, no banker willing to answer him, and no convincing lie ready for the people waiting on his promises. He pulled out his phone and stared at the dark screen. He had 12 missed calls from Courtney and 7 from Beatrice. Courtney's engagement party was scheduled for tomorrow evening at an exclusive country club downtown, an event Cameron had promised to bankroll completely. Beatrice was undoubtedly calling to finalize the massive catering payments due by noon. Then there were the angry texts from Bianca. She was demanding to know why the escrow company had called her about a bounced payment. She was threatening to pack her bags and leave him if he did not explain everything right away today. Cameron was a man who lived purely on the adulation of the women he manipulated. The terrifying thought of facing Courtney's tears, his mother's profound disappointment, and Bianca's abandonment pushed him completely past the brink of rational thought. He needed cash. He needed a massive injection of untraceable liquidity, and he needed it before the sun went down. Traditional banks would not even let him through the front doors right now. Private lenders required background checks and collateral audits that would immediately flag the strict federal freeze on his assets. He was out of all legal and legitimate options everywhere. So he decided to cross a very dark boundary he had always considered beneath his pristine status. During his early days in commercial real estate, Cameron had occasionally crossed paths with a variety of unsavory characters who operated deep in the shadows of the city's financial sector. These were men who provided high-interest bridge loans to desperate developers. They asked zero questions, but they demanded ruinous physical collateral. He had kept one specific number saved securely in his phone contacts under a fake vendor name for years. It was a relic from a deal he had almost botched completely. He dialed the number while standing on the sidewalk. The rough man on the other end agreed to provide a $60,000 cash loan by the afternoon. The terms were absolutely extortionate. They demanded a 40% weekly interest rate and an absolute requirement for physical high-value collateral to secure the cash. Cameron knew he had nothing left to his name. I had meticulously stripped his access to every shared asset, every bank account, and every property deed. But there was one thing left, something of immense value that I had deliberately kept out of our financial portfolios. Stored safely in the detached, climate-controlled third bay of our massive home garage was a pristine cherry-red 1967 Mustang. It was completely restored, flawless, down to the original leather upholstery. The beautiful car had belonged to my late father. He and I had spent countless weekends under the hood of that machine when I was a teenager. We would get covered in dark grease and share quiet conversations about my future. When he passed away, the stunning Mustang became my most treasured possession. I rarely drove it, preferring to keep it totally safe and completely immaculate. Cameron knew exactly how much that classic car meant to me. He also knew it was worth roughly $80,000 to any serious collector. Since I had locked the deadbolt on the main house, Cameron wrongly assumed the primary property was totally impenetrable. But he still had the manual override key for the detached garage safely hidden inside his golf bag. Around 2 in the afternoon, while I was sitting in Felix's downtown office, reviewing the final foreclosure documents, Cameron drove back to our quiet suburban neighborhood. He parked down the street to carefully avoid drawing any unwanted attention. He walked up the back alley and slipped through the wooden side gate. 2 large men wearing dark leather jackets arrived 5 minutes later in a heavy flatbed tow truck. They parked it discreetly near the narrow alley entrance. Inside the main house, Marta, my faithful housekeeper of 6 years, was busy dusting the upstairs hallway. Marta was a sharp, observant woman who had always treated me with gentle maternal kindness. I had texted her earlier that week, firmly warning her that Cameron was no longer welcome in the house and instructing her to keep all outer doors securely locked. When she heard the low, rumbling growl of a heavy diesel engine idling near the back fence, her keen instincts immediately flared. She walked quietly into the empty guest bedroom, which offered a perfectly clear view of the detached garage. Marta pulled the sheer white curtain back just 1 inch. Below her, the wide garage bay door was completely open. Cameron was standing on the gray concrete driveway holding a clipboard and signing a piece of paper handed to him by one of the large men. The other frightening man was pulling the heavy canvas tarp off my father's Mustang. Marta watched in absolute horror as Cameron reached into his pant pocket and handed a silver ring of keys directly to the man in the dark jacket. The man climbed into the driver's seat of the vintage Mustang. The old engine roared to life, the classic muscle car sound echoing loudly across the quiet suburban afternoon. Cameron took a thick manila envelope from the first man, stuffed it hastily into his own jacket pocket, and walked quickly away down the alley without looking back once. The scary men slowly backed the beautiful Mustang out of the garage and stopped it. They loaded it onto the flatbed truck and secured the tires with heavy yellow straps. Marta did not wait for the noisy truck to drive away. She pulled her cell phone from her apron pocket and dialed my personal number immediately. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. I was sitting at a massive mahogany conference table with Felix when the call finally came through. I excused myself politely and answered. "Miss Nora Marta," said her voice a frantic, breathless whisper. "I am so terribly sorry to interrupt your work. But Mr. Cameron has literally just left the main house right now. He opened the back garage. He had 2 very scary-looking men with him. They brought a tow truck." I stood up slowly, the blood draining completely from my face. "What did he do, Marta?" "He gave them the keys to your father's car, Miss Nora. He signed some papers, took a big envelope, and let them drive the red car onto their truck. They just left down the alley. I did not know what to do. I did not want them to see me looking." A cold, profound silence settled over my mind. The morning satisfaction vanished entirely today. Cameron pawning my dead father's car to an underground loan shark to fund his sister's vanity party and his mistress's lifestyle was a violation of the sacred. It was the ultimate line. Instead of calling the police, I looked at Felix. "Contact the underground lender through a shadow proxy today." Felix did not hesitate. He understood the gravity of the situation the moment he saw the cold determination in my eyes. Within 10 minutes, he had his lead investigator track the license plate of the tow truck Marta had wisely managed to photograph from the upstairs window. The truck belonged to a small, extremely discreet towing company that served as a front for a well-known underground lending syndicate operating out of the industrial district. Felix utilized a highly insulated shadow proxy, an anonymous corporate entity we had established, within my blind trust for precisely this type of delicate financial maneuver. The proxy reached out to the syndicate's primary broker before the tow truck even arrived at their secure storage facility. The negotiation was swift and entirely devoid of emotion. Underground lenders cared about exactly one thing, which was an immediate and guaranteed return on their risky investments. Through the proxy, Felix offered to buy Cameron's newly acquired debt entirely in cash, at a premium above the exorbitant principal they had just handed to my husband. The only stipulation was that the syndicate had to transfer the physical collateral, my father's 1967 Mustang, along with a clean, legally binding bill of sale, directly to my holding company immediately. To sweeten the deal, Felix promised the funds would clear their designated offshore account within the hour. The broker accepted the terms without a single question. By 5 o'clock that evening, the vintage Mustang was safely sitting in a heavily fortified, climate-controlled storage facility owned by my trust. I held the original title in my hands, now legally transferred into the name of my holding company. Cameron thought he had pawned my most precious memory to save his crumbling facade. Instead, he had unwittingly sold it directly to me, fully relinquishing any marital claim he might have ever tried to assert over the vehicle in a divorce proceeding. He had essentially laundered my own car back to me perfectly legally while digging himself an inescapable grave of financial fraud. I left Felix's office as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the city skyline. I drove back to the suburban house, feeling a profound sense of calm settling over my mind. The pieces of the board were now exactly where I needed them to be. When I unlocked the front door and stepped into the entryway, the house smelled faintly of expensive cologne and takeout food. Cameron had returned. I found him in the living room pouring himself a generous glass of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. He was wearing a fresh, sharply tailored suit, looking remarkably relaxed for a man whose entire legitimate empire had just been seized by federal authorities. The frantic, terrified energy he had displayed on the porch of Bianca's repossessed townhouse was completely gone. In its place was a sickening, arrogant swagger. He took a slow sip of his drink and turned to face me, a smug smile stretching across his handsome face. "You look tired, Nora," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly in the quiet room. "You really should learn to leave the heavy lifting to the professionals." I set my briefcase down on the console table and crossed my arms, observing him with mild curiosity. "You seem to be in exceptionally high spirits for a man who is currently locked out of his own office building," I noted, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Cameron chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that once made me feel safe, but now merely highlighted his absolute delusion. He walked over to the leather sofa and sat down, crossing one ankle over his knee, in a display of total ease. "You really thought you had me backed into a corner, did not you? You thought freezing my corporate accounts and buying up Bianca's townhouse would make me crawl back to you begging for mercy." He took another sip of bourbon, his eyes gleaming with false victory. "But you forgot one crucial detail about me, Nora. I am a survivor. I am a builder. I always find a way to generate capital when I need it. Always." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table with a loud, satisfying thud. It was the exact same envelope Marta had seen the large man hand to him in the alleyway behind our garage. It was thick with the $60,000 in illicit cash he had traded my father's car to obtain. "There is enough cash right here to cover every expense for Courtney's party tomorrow night," Cameron bragged, gesturing to the envelope. "The country club is paid in full. The caterers are handled. My mother is thrilled, and Bianca is shopping for a new dress. You failed completely." I stared at the envelope of dirty cash. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted me by walking straight into the arms of an organized crime syndicate. The sheer arrogance of his stupidity was breathtaking. "You pawned my father's car," I said quietly, testing the waters to see how far he would commit to his lie. Cameron did not even flinch. His smile widened into a predatory grin. "I simply leveraged an underutilized marital asset," he corrected smoothly. "It was gathering dust in the garage, Nora. It served a much better purpose securing my cash flow. But do not worry. I plan to get it back eventually. Or maybe I will not. It depends on how cooperative you decide to be." He stood up from the sofa, smoothing the lapels of his expensive jacket, and walked slowly toward me. He stopped just a few feet away, attempting to use his height to intimidate me, a tactic that had ceased working a long time ago. "You have played your little games," Nora Cameron said, his voice dropping into a harsh register. "But the game is over now. I have secured the funding to keep my family completely insulated from your vindictive attacks. I have retained top-tier legal counsel to handle the federal freeze, and I am filing for divorce on Monday morning. You are about to lose everything in this divorce. I will make sure you walk away with absolutely nothing." I simply looked at him, my expression completely serene. I felt a small, genuine smile touch the corners of my mouth. "That is quite a comprehensive plan, Cameron," I said softly. "I admire your sudden burst of resourcefulness." Cameron frowned, his arrogant swagger faltering slightly at my calm response. He had expected resistance, not pleasant agreement. I turned and walked gracefully toward the staircase. Upstairs in the master bedroom, I pulled my favorite leather weekender bag from the closet. I packed a deep emerald green evening gown specifically for tomorrow, silver heels, my best diamond earrings, and a clutch. I zipped the bag closed and slung the strap over my shoulder. I walked back downstairs, my footsteps unhurried. Cameron stood in the center of the living room watching me with growing confusion. "Where are you going?" he demanded, apprehension creeping into his voice. I smiled warmly, adjusting the leather strap of my bag on my shoulder. "I am not running away." "Cameron," I said, my voice soft and perfectly clear. "I'll see you at Courtney's engagement party. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The echo of the microphone tap hung in the chandelier-lit ballroom. Hundreds of eyes shifted from their champagne glasses to the center stage. I looked out over the sea of tailored tuxedos and expensive evening gowns. I saw the faces of men and women who had invested millions into Cameron's real estate portfolio. I saw Beatrice clutching her pearls, her face draining of all color. I saw Courtney gripping her new fiancé's arm, her jaw practically on the polished hardwood floor. And there, near the ice sculpture, stood Cameron. He was standing next to Bianca, who was wearing a dress that I had undoubtedly paid for. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing smoothly through the premium sound system. "I want to thank you all for attending this beautiful engagement celebration. As the primary financial sponsor of this event, and the new legal owner of this country club's commercial debt, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to my property." A collective gasp rippled through the elegant crowd. Courtney let out a shrill shriek that caused several guests nearby to flinch. "What is she talking about?" Courtney demanded, stomping her silver heel. "Mom, make her get down from there. She is ruining my perfect night." Beatrice stepped forward, attempting to muster her usual aristocratic authority. "Nora, you are making a drunken spectacle of yourself," Beatrice announced loudly, trying to project a confident smile to the investors watching her. "Security is on the way. Please step down before you embarrass Cameron any further." I did not move an inch. I simply adjusted my grip on the microphone stand and smiled down at the frantic older woman. "I am perfectly sober, Beatrice," I replied, making sure the microphone caught every single syllable. "And security works for the venue management, who currently report directly to my holding company. No one is coming to escort me anywhere. But I do think it is time we clear the air about who is actually funding this lavish lifestyle you all seem to enjoy so much." The ballroom went silent, but this time the silence did not feel polite. It felt investigative. The men and women who had spent the evening congratulating Cameron began studying him instead. Their smiles faded as they calculated how much of their own money was tied to his reputation. Cameron recovered first. He pushed past a waiter and moved toward the stage with a tight, furious smile. "Nora, this is neither the time nor the place," he said. His voice was low enough to sound controlled, but the microphone carried every tremor. "You are upset, and I understand that. We can discuss our private marital issues at home." I looked down at him. "This is not a private marital issue," I replied. "It involves corporate funds, investor capital, pledged assets, and transactions made through accounts connected to people in this room." A murmur moved through the crowd. Cameron climbed the first step. "She is bluffing," he announced, turning toward the guests. My wife works with government spreadsheets and has developed an exaggerated opinion of her own authority. She has been under tremendous stress. Please do not allow a domestic disagreement to disrupt Courtney's celebration. He reached for the microphone. Before his hand touched it, the country club's security director stepped between us. The man was broad-shouldered, discreetly dressed, and entirely unimpressed by Cameron's status. Mrs. Mitchell has authorized access to the stage and presentation system, the director said. You will need to remain off the platform unless she invites you up. Cameron stared at him. This is my sister's event. The director glanced toward the venue manager standing near the ballroom doors. The manager held a tablet against her chest and gave a firm nod. The primary financial guarantee for tonight's event is connected to Mrs. Mitchell, the director answered. Until the billing dispute is resolved, her authorization remains valid. Courtney made a strangled sound near the cake table. My event does not have a billing dispute, she snapped. Everything has been paid. Cameron told me the final transfer cleared this afternoon. The venue manager did not respond. Her expression said enough. Several guests turned toward Courtney. Her fiancé remained beside her, but the easy smile he had worn earlier was gone. Beatrice crossed the room quickly, pearls trembling against her throat. This is outrageous, she declared. Nora, whatever resentment you have toward my son, you will not humiliate this family in front of our friends. Put down that microphone and leave before you embarrass yourself any further. I met her gaze. I am not asking anyone here to believe me because I am Cameron's wife. I am asking them to examine records connected to their own accounts. That sentence changed the room. A gray-haired banker near the front lowered his champagne glass. Two developers exchanged a look and moved closer to the stage. A woman who managed a regional investment fund opened the financial application on her phone. These people had built careers by recognizing risk. Cameron could dismiss me as emotional, but he could not stop them from reacting to the possibility that their money had been mishandled. Cameron saw the shift and raised his voice. There are no records, he said. She has no access to my company. She is manufacturing a spectacle because I asked for a divorce. You did not ask for a divorce, I replied. You planned to serve me papers after emptying our joint account and moving another woman into our home. But even that is not the reason I'm standing here. Bianca went rigid beside a cocktail table. Her hand moved protectively over her stomach. She looked at Cameron, waiting for him to deny the statement. He did not. He was too focused on the investors. Mr. Harrison, the gray-haired banker, stepped forward. His voice carried without a microphone. Cameron, if your wife has records involving investor accounts, let her present them. There is nothing to present, Cameron insisted. Then allowing her to continue should not concern you, Harrison replied. The logic trapped him. If Cameron forced security to remove me, he would look terrified of evidence. If he let me speak, he had no idea what I would reveal. I watched him calculate both outcomes and find no safe option. Courtney hurried toward Harrison. Please, she said, attempting a charming smile. Tonight is supposed to celebrate my engagement. Surely this can wait until tomorrow. Harrison did not look at her. Financial misconduct does not become less relevant because there is a cake in the room. A few guests laughed nervously. Courtney's face flushed. I lifted one hand, calming the growing noise. I will not ask anyone to rely on accusations, I said. Every document you are about to see is supported by transaction identifiers, bank timestamps, registration records, and preserved source files. The records have been copied without altering the originals. My attorney has maintained the chain of custody. The relevant institutions can verify them independently. The investment manager near the front stopped typing and looked up sharply. Chain of custody was not the language of a jealous spouse. It was the language of someone preparing evidence. Cameron understood that too. His face changed. You used federal resources to spy on me, he said. That is a crime. No, I answered. The records were obtained through accounts, property files, and security systems I am legally authorized to access. Nothing presented tonight comes from classified work or restricted government databases. You should be very careful about inventing another allegation in front of this many witnesses. His mouth closed. Beatrice tried a different approach. Her voice softened into the false concern she used whenever cruelty stopped working. Nora, darling, you are clearly overwhelmed. Come down from the stage. We can find a doctor, and no one here needs to remember this unfortunate episode. The insult landed badly. Guests who had watched Cameron call me unstable now saw his mother repeating the same strategy instead of addressing the financial questions. Harrison's expression hardened. Courtney's fiancé looked from Beatrice to Cameron with growing unease. I smiled at Beatrice. Thank you for demonstrating exactly how this family responds when a woman asks for documentation. The room went still again. Cameron stepped toward the venue manager and demanded that she shut down the sound system. She refused. He then looked toward the audio-visual booth and made a cutting motion across his throat. The technician did not move. A security guard quietly repositioned himself at the bottom of the stage stairs. I continued before Cameron could create another distraction. Some of you invested in downtown commercial property. Others funded the harbor development, the apartment conversion, or the federal housing proposal Cameron claimed was approaching final approval. Several of you were told delays came from permit supply chains or government processing. Tonight you will be able to compare those explanations with the actual movement of your funds. Phones appeared across the room. Investors opened emails, account statements, and old transfer confirmations. The celebration had become an emergency audit, and everyone understood it except Courtney, who stood beneath the floral arch as if sheer denial could restore the evening. Bianca moved closer to Cameron and whispered something I could not hear. He pulled his arm away from her. The small rejection told her more than any answer could. She stepped back, fear replacing confusion. I looked over the crowd one final time. I am not here to destroy a party, I said. I am here because this room contains the people whose money paid for it. You deserve to know whether the champagne, the flowers, the jewelry, and the promises surrounding you were purchased with legitimate profits or with funds taken from somewhere else. No one spoke. I reached into my clutch and removed a small presentation remote. Cameron watched it as though it were a weapon. All right, I said. Let us begin with the bill for tonight. I turned slightly and looked up toward the darkened balcony at the back of the room. I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, deliberate signal to the audio-visual booth. Felix had coordinated with the venue technicians earlier this afternoon. A mechanical hum filled the quiet ballroom as 3 massive projection screens slowly descended from the ceiling behind the stage. The room darkened slightly as the bright projectors flickered to life. Gasps rippled through the crowd as enormous, meticulously detailed financial spreadsheets illuminated the screens, glowing brightly in the dim room. These were not the forged, sloppy ledgers Cameron had tried to use to blackmail me. These were certified federal-grade financial tracings. I had spent the entire week tracking every single dime that flowed through his fraudulent real estate empire, and now the undeniable proof was displayed in massive, bold letters for all of high society to witness. Let us start with the deposit for the country club tonight, I said conversationally, pacing slowly across the stage. I aimed a small green laser pointer at the center screen. As you can see on row 14, a wire transfer of $60,000 was initiated on Tuesday morning. Cameron claimed this money came from a successful commercial property flip. However, if we follow the digital routing numbers, we see the funds actually originated from a high-interest loan provided by an underground lending syndicate. To secure this illicit loan, Cameron handed over the title to a classic car that did not belong to him. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but I was just getting started. I clicked a button on my remote and the spreadsheet shifted to a new, vastly more complex page. Now let us address the real estate investments many of you in this room have generously funded. I continued, my voice steady and commanding. Cameron promised you all double-digit returns on your capital. He showed you glossy brochures of luxury apartment complexes and commercial high-rises. But let us look at where your investment capital actually went. I traced the laser pointer along a series of highlighted red transactions. Mr. Harrison, I said, looking directly at a prominent local banker standing near the front row. You wired $1.2 million to Cameron just last month for the downtown development project. According to this certified ledger, those funds sat in escrow for exactly 12 hours before being diverted into 3 separate shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. From there, the money was quietly funneled back into personal bank accounts to pay off his massive gambling debts and fund a luxury townhouse for his mistress. Mr. Harrison turned a dangerous shade of deep crimson. He dropped his champagne flute and the crystal shattered against the floor. The sound was like a starting pistol. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of panicked whispers and angry shouts. I clicked to the next slide, bringing up a detailed breakdown of Beatrice and her lavish lifestyle. For anyone wondering how Beatrice affords her weekly shopping trips to Paris, or how Courtney paid for her designer wardrobe, look at column G, I instructed. Your investment dividends were used to pay off their personal credit cards. The diamond necklace Courtney is currently wearing was purchased with funds meant for the Harborside construction project. Every expensive detail of their curated image was bought and paid for with your stolen money. I watched from the stage as the wealthy investors, the people Beatrice had spent years trying to impress and manipulate, turned to look at the Golden family with absolute disgust. Beatrice tried to hide her face behind her hands, but there was nowhere to run. The wealthy man engaged to Courtney stared at the screen, looking at the exact routing numbers proving his bride was living entirely on stolen charity. He remained beside Courtney, but his eyes stayed fixed on the figures, his expression hardening with every highlighted transfer. Bianca was leaning heavily against a nearby cocktail table, crying hysterically as she realized the exceptionally rich, glamorous life she had been promised was nothing but a fragile, pathetic illusion built entirely on countless federal crimes and deceit. She was trembling uncontrollably, clutching her pregnant stomach as the sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over her. She looked at the screen, seeing her own name listed next to a fraudulent property purchase. She finally understood that Cameron had never been a wealthy mogul. He was just a desperate, pathetic con artist who used my salary to fund his lies. I stood in the center of the stage, perfectly composed, watching the destruction of their facade unfold exactly as I had orchestrated. I had systematically dismantled his empire, exposed his crimes, and shattered their social standing permanently. There was absolutely no recovering from this level of public financial exposure in our city. Cameron shouted that the records were fabricated and started toward the stairs, but 2 investors moved into the aisle before he reached them. Harrison raised one hand and ordered him to stay where he was until every transaction had been explained. Cameron stopped, trapped by the men whose approval he still needed. I used the interruption to turn toward the booth and give the technician a precise signal. The massive projection screens behind me instantly shifted from the complex financial spreadsheets to a stark black background. A single crystal-clear audio file began to play through the premium surround sound speakers that were positioned in every corner of the lavish ballroom. The recording had been captured just 2 weeks prior by the discreet security cameras I had installed in the main house living room. Beatrice's voice filled the space, echoing with undeniable clarity. She was speaking to Cameron, her tone dripping with aristocratic arrogance and profound boredom. "Do not worry about those investors, darling," her recorded voice drawled smoothly. "They are just gullible old fools with more money than sense. Just smile, pour them another glass of cheap scotch, and tell them the permit process is delayed. They love feeling like they are part of some exclusive club. They will never actually check the zoning records. It is almost pathetic how easily they hand over their checks." The audio clipped to an end, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. The wealthy men and women who had just been aggressively defending the Golden family stood completely frozen. I watched the prominent local banker, Mr. Harrison, slowly lower his phone. The color rushed into his face, turning his skin a mottled, dangerous shade of crimson. He turned his gaze slowly toward Beatrice. The older woman was standing near the ice sculpture, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She reached out a trembling hand toward him, attempting to summon her usual sophisticated charm, but the gesture fell utterly flat. "Harrison, please," Beatrice stammered, her voice shaking violently. That was taken out of context. She recorded a private conversation in my own home. It is a violation of privacy. Harrison ignored her and raised his phone to his ear. In a voice loud enough for the nearest investors to hear, he instructed his legal counsel to freeze every credit facility connected to Cameron's companies and preserve all related communications. Then he looked directly at Beatrice. "Whatever friendship you believed existed between our families ended with that recording," he said. He turned toward the exit, and two other investors followed him while continuing urgent calls to their attorneys. The high society crowd that Beatrice had spent her adult life cultivating turned on her in an instant. The polite, wealthy smiles vanished, replaced by furious glares and angry, hushed whispers. Women who had been kissing her cheek just an hour ago now took deliberate physical steps away from her, as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face. She found absolutely none. Her carefully constructed empire of social influence was completely annihilated in less than 60 seconds. I turned my attention away from the older woman's public ruin and looked back out over the angry, murmuring crowd. I picked up the microphone from the stand and smiled warmly. "But we are not quite finished with our celebrations tonight," I announced, my voice cutting easily through the rising tension in the ballroom. "We have another very special individual to acknowledge." I pointed directly at the cocktail table near the front of the stage. Bianca was still standing there, clutching her small designer purse, her face pale with terror as she realized the true extent of the disaster unfolding around her. "And a special toast to Cameron's highly valued acquisitions consultant," I said smoothly, making sure to emphasize the fake corporate title he had given her. "A consultant who is currently 6 months pregnant with his child. A child whose future nursery, along with the rest of her lavish lifestyle, has been funded entirely by the $450,000 he stole directly from my personal blind trust accounts." The collective gasp from the remaining guests was deafening. Every head in the room snapped toward Bianca. The young woman instinctively crossed her arms over her stomach, shrinking back against the high-top table as the crushing weight of public judgment fell squarely onto her shoulders. She looked desperately toward Cameron for protection, but he was completely paralyzed on the edge of the stage, staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. He had genuinely believed his secret life was totally impenetrable. He had believed he was smart enough to juggle a wife, a pregnant mistress, and a massive web of federal fraud without dropping a single ball. Near the back of the room, the wealthy young man engaged to Courtney was staring at the stage, his handsome face utterly blank. He looked from the projected financial ledgers, proving his bride was broke, to Beatrice crying in the corner, and finally to Cameron standing near his pregnant mistress. He was a man who valued pristine reputation above all else, and he realized he was currently standing in the epicenter of the biggest social and financial scandal this city had seen in decades. He turned to Courtney. She reached for his arm, her face streaked with ruined mascara and desperate tears. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking loudly in the quiet room. "Please do not look at me like that. I had no idea about any of this. I swear to you, I did not know." Her fiancé did not say a single word of comfort. He reached out, took her left hand with deliberate precision, and smoothly pulled the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. He dropped the expensive ring directly into her open palm, turned his back on the sobbing woman, and walked quickly out of the ballroom without a single backward glance. Courtney let out a guttural, agonizing wail and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The Golden family was entirely destroyed. Their money was gone, their reputation was ruined, and their future was a dark, inescapable void of federal investigations and social exile. I watched the room absorb the evidence, but Cameron's silence did not look like surrender. His shoulders tightened, his breathing turned shallow, and his eyes moved from the exits to the stage. The calculations behind his expression had vanished. What remained was raw panic and I understood that the most dangerous moment had not passed yet. Cameron let out a sound that was barely human. It was a raw, primal scream of absolute, unhinged devastation. The reality of his complete destruction had finally shattered the last remaining fragments of his sanity. He charged the stage with terrifying speed, his eyes wide and wild, his hands balled into tight, violent fists. He scrambled up the wooden steps, ignoring the shouts of the remaining investors, his focus locked entirely on me. I did not move. I did not drop the microphone. I simply stood my ground and watched my former husband charge toward me like a wounded, cornered animal. He was 10 feet away, then 5, his face twisted in a mask of pure, murderous rage. He reached out to grab me, his fingers mere inches from the fabric of my emerald green gown. But before he could make physical contact, before he could unleash the violent anger boiling over inside his mind, a booming crash echoed across the ballroom. The heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance burst open with enough force to shake the walls. A wave of cold night air swept across the frozen crowd behind him. Cameron stopped dead. His fists remained clenched, but the murderous momentum carrying him toward me vanished instantly. He spun around, staring at the entryway. It was not the local police walking through those doors. The men and women filing into the room were an entirely different breed. They moved with a synchronized lethality, wearing tactical windbreakers, bearing the unmistakable gold lettering of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There were at least a dozen of them spreading out to secure the perimeter. The wealthy investors parted like the Red Sea, backing away from the stage and giving the federal agents a wide path. The lead agent, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a humorless expression, walked directly down the center aisle. She held a thick leather folder in her left hand, keeping her right hand resting casually near her hip. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sharp click of her shoes against the polished hardwood. Cameron's arrogant facade finally cracked, replaced by the panic of a trapped animal. He looked from the approaching federal agents to the exit doors behind the stage, calculating his odds of escape. He took one hesitant step backward. The lead agent stopped at the base of the stage, looking up at my husband with eyes that conveyed zero sympathy. "Cameron Thomas," she said, her voice projecting across the dead silent room. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest." Cameron opened his mouth, but his usual smooth charm failed him. He stammered, raising his trembling hands in surrender. "There has to be a mistake," he managed to say, his voice cracking. "You have the wrong man. I am a respected business owner in this city. This is a misunderstanding over a commercial loan. My lawyer can clear this up tomorrow." Agent Miller did not even blink. She opened her leather folder. "You are being charged with 47 counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the deliberate defrauding of a federal employee. The identity theft charge alone carries a mandatory minimum sentence. There is no mistake. We have been reviewing your financial records for the past 48 hours. Cameron whipped his head around to stare at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and profound disbelief. The realization finally hit him. The federal audit team had not just stumbled upon his crimes by accident. 2 days ago, I had walked into the local field office and handed Agent Miller an audited airtight flash drive containing every piece of evidence she needed. I had documented his fake offshore accounts, the forged signatures on my trust documents, and the illegal transfer of funds using my federal identification numbers. I had handed them his entire criminal enterprise wrapped in a neat bow. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Agent Miller ordered. 2 other agents flanked her, pulling heavy metal handcuffs from their belts. Cameron did not resist. All the fight had drained out of him. He slowly turned around his shoulders, slumping in absolute defeat. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists echoed through the ballroom. The wealthy investors watched in stunned silence as the man they thought was a real estate mogul was restrained like a common criminal. The illusion of his success was dead, replaced by the humiliating reality of his federal arrest. But Agent Miller was not finished. She turned her attention away from Cameron and looked out over the crowd. She scanned the remaining faces of the Golden family until her eyes locked onto the older woman hiding near the ice sculpture. Beatrice Thomas, Agent Miller announced. Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. She shrank back against the table. "I have done nothing," she cried out. "I am just a mother supporting her son. You cannot do this to me." "You are being placed under arrest as an accessory to federal wire fraud," Agent Miller stated. Two agents immediately moved toward the older woman. "The certified ledgers we received clearly indicate you knowingly accepted and spent stolen investment funds to finance your personal lifestyle. You are fully complicit." Beatrice let out a high, thin wail as the agents grasped her arms. She tried to pull away, babbling incoherently about her social standing. The agents ignored her frantic protests, smoothly turning her around and securing her wrists in handcuffs. The crowd simply watched her be arrested with expressions of disgust. Not a single person stepped forward to offer assistance. Near the back of the room, Courtney remained collapsed on the hardwood floor. She was a pathetic sight, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. The massive diamond engagement ring was gone, leaving a stark red indentation on her finger. She was sitting in a $15,000 designer evening gown, completely aware that she had absolutely no way to pay for it. Her wealthy fiancé had abandoned her without a second thought. Her high society friends were already edging toward the exits, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Courtney was alone, facing a future stripped of the luxury she felt she deserved. Agent Miller read Cameron his rights as the other agents began escorting him toward the main doors. He stumbled slightly. The crowd parted, giving them a wide berth as they marched the disgraced man out of the country club. As they passed the center stage, Cameron stopped. The agents pushed him forward, but he dug his heels into the floor, turning his head to look back at me one final time. He was breathing heavily, his face covered in a sheen of cold sweat. He expected to see burning anger in my eyes. He desperately wanted to see that he still mattered to me, even if it was only as an object of my hatred. He wanted proof that he had left a permanent mark on my soul. I stood on the stage looking down at him. I did not feel a shred of anger. I did not feel vindictive joy. I felt absolutely nothing. The man standing in handcuffs before me was a complete stranger, a pathetic remnant of a past life I had already entirely discarded. The emotional hold he once had over my heart had been completely severed. I offered him no smile, no scowl, no parting words of condemnation. I simply looked at him with total, absolute indifference. Cameron's chest hitched as the realization washed over him. My indifference was the final lethal blow. The federal agents gave him a sharp shove, forcing him to keep walking. He stumbled forward, his head dropping toward his chest as they led him out of the ballroom and into the waiting custody transport vehicles. I turned away from the door, feeling the stifling atmosphere lift from my shoulders. The air in my lungs felt clean. A waiter was standing near the edge of the stage holding a silver tray with trembling hands, his eyes wide as he processed the chaotic scene. I walked gracefully down the flight of stairs, my silver heels clicking softly. I reached out gently, handed my empty champagne glass to the stunned waiter, and gave him a serene nod. I smoothed the skirt of my green gown, turned my back on the murmuring crowd, and walked out into the cool night air. The cool night air was a sharp, welcoming contrast to the suffocating heat of the ruined gala. I took a deep breath, letting the absolute finality of the evening wash over me. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles faded into the distance, carrying my former husband away to a reality he had never imagined for himself. I stepped into my waiting town car and told the driver to take me to my temporary hotel suite. I did not look back at the country club. My past was permanently behind me, and the future was entirely mine to control. 6 months passed with a swift, brutal efficiency that left the Thomas family reeling in my wake. The divorce proceedings were remarkably uncomplicated, mostly because Cameron was in no position to contest a single demand I made. Facing 47 counts of federal wire fraud and identity theft, his defense attorney advised him to surrender whatever assets remained to mitigate his sentence. It did not help him much. The federal judge, disgusted by his brazen theft from a federal employee and his manipulation of dozens of elderly investors, sentenced Cameron to 5 consecutive years in a minimum security federal prison. He lost everything. The corporate accounts were seized, his remaining shell companies were dismantled by federal auditors, and his reputation was permanently incinerated. The high society friends he had spent years cultivating abandoned him, instantly erasing his name from their contacts and pretending they had never done business with him. As restitution for the funds he had stolen from my blind trust, the court awarded me full, uncontested ownership of our marital home. The sprawling, pretentious estate had always been a monument to his ego, a place where I had endured years of silent mockery and emotional neglect from his family. I had absolutely no desire to live inside those toxic walls ever again. Instead, I sold the entire property to a commercial real estate developer with a very specific, ironclad stipulation in the contract. I stood on the sidewalk across the street on a crisp Tuesday morning, sipping a hot coffee, as a massive yellow bulldozer tore through the grand front pillars of the house. The heavy machinery crushed the custom mahogany doors, shattered the imported windows, and collapsed the expensive roof inward. It took less than 3 hours to level the structure completely. I watched the dust settle over the rubble, feeling a profound sense of closure, as the physical manifestation of my miserable marriage was literally erased from the earth. The Golden family had built their empire on my suffering, and now that empire was nothing but a pile of shattered wood and broken bricks. The fallout for Beatrice and Courtney was equally devastating. Without Cameron's stolen funds to finance their lavish lifestyle, their financial reality crashed down on them with terrifying speed. Their credit cards were frozen, their luxury leased vehicles were repossessed in the middle of the night, and their country club memberships were revoked due to unpaid dues. The wealthy women Beatrice had spent decades gossiping with suddenly stopped returning her calls. The society luncheons and charity galas went on without them, their names permanently blacklisted from every respectable guest list in the city. Completely bankrupt and entirely out of options, they were forced to vacate their expensive rental property. They ended up in a cramped, run-down studio apartment in a neglected neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The space was barely large enough to fit 2 twin beds and a small, outdated kitchen. Beatrice, who had once prided herself on her imported silk curtains and antique furniture, now spent her days sitting in a worn armchair staring blankly at a small television screen, mourning the permanent loss of her social kingdom. She rarely left the tiny apartment, too humiliated to show her face in a city that now knew exactly who she really was. Courtney's reality was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. Abandoned by her wealthy fiancé and completely cut off from her social circle, she was forced to do something she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. She had to work. With no college degree, no practical skills, and a ruined reputation, her options were severely limited. She found employment working the checkout register at a discount retail store, the exact kind of minimum wage establishment she used to viciously mock when we were married. I occasionally drove past the store on my way to business meetings. Once I glanced through the large glass windows and saw her standing behind the register wearing a stiff polyester uniform, her shoulders slumped in absolute defeat as she bagged cheap merchandise for impatient customers. The arrogance that once defined her every movement was completely gone, replaced by the exhausting, relentless reality of surviving on minimum wage. They had treated me like a disposable asset, a quiet little workhorse meant only to fund their delusions. Now they were living the exact nightmare they thought they were immune to, trapped in a cycle of poverty and social exile with absolutely no way out. As for me, my life blossomed in ways I never allowed myself to imagine. The holding company I created to dismantle Cameron's empire was now a legitimate, thriving investment firm. I had transitioned from a quiet federal forensic actuary into a formidable financial strategist. My days were filled with high-level meetings and lucrative acquisitions, but I was no longer working to satisfy someone else's ego. I was building a legacy entirely for myself. The suffocating weight of my past was gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable independence that guided my every decision. I systematically destroyed the people who tried to ruin me, and I emerged from the wreckage stronger, smarter, and incredibly wealthy. My revenge was absolute, but it was also entirely legal, precise, and flawlessly executed. I meanwhile stepped out of a private, exclusive elevator into a stunning, sun-drenched penthouse in the city center. The morning sun felt warm against my face as I slid open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the expansive terrace of my new penthouse. The city sprawled out below me, a vast network of glass and steel that hummed with quiet, relentless energy. I walked to the edge of the glass railing and rested my hands against the cool metal frame, taking in the unobstructed view of the skyline. The air up here was crisp and remarkably still, far removed from the noise and chaos of the streets down below. There was a time not too long ago when I felt entirely trapped in a life that was constantly dictated by the demands and deceptions of other people. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a mold created by a husband who saw me only as a financial stepping stone, and a family that viewed me with thinly veiled contempt. But standing here now, surrounded by the quiet luxury of a home I had purchased entirely with my own hard-earned money, that suffocating past felt like it belonged to a completely different lifetime. The penthouse was a reflection of my new reality, characterized by clean lines, wide-open spaces, and an absolute absence of pretense. I breathed in the fresh morning air, letting the profound sense of physical and emotional elevation settle deep into my bones. Every single detail of this new life was a deliberate choice I had made for myself. The soft sound of footsteps against the polished hardwood floor caught my attention. I turned around to see Marta stepping out onto the terrace. She was not wearing a stiff housekeeper uniform or carrying a silver tray of commands. Instead, she was dressed in a sharp-tailored navy blue blazer and crisp trousers, looking every bit the formidable professional she truly was. When I had finalized the plans to launch my own private forensic consulting firm, I knew immediately that I needed someone with absolute loyalty, flawless organizational skills, and an unbreakable moral compass to help me run my life. I had offered Marta the position of estate manager with a salary that reflected her true worth, which happened to be 3 times what the Golden family had ever paid her. She had accepted without a moment of hesitation. She now managed my properties, coordinated my private security, and oversaw the administrative staff for my consulting business. She was no longer just the woman who kept a house clean. She was my most trusted confidant and the operational backbone of my entire enterprise. It felt incredibly fitting that the woman who had spent years being ignored by Beatrice and Courtney was now commanding a team of professionals and managing a massive financial portfolio. Marta walked across the stone tiles of the balcony and stopped beside me at the railing. For a long moment, we simply stood side by side in companionable silence, watching the morning traffic move like tiny metallic rivers through the city avenues far below. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic rehashing of the past. We had both lived through the toxic environment of that destroyed estate, and we had both emerged from the wreckage entirely unscathed. I looked at her, recognizing the quiet strength in her posture. It was strange to think how a single whispered phone call from her all those months ago had been the catalyst for this entire transformation. If she had chosen to remain silent out of fear or misplaced loyalty to her employers, I might still be living in that sprawling house, completely unaware of the massive fraud being committed using my name. She had risked her own livelihood to warn me, and I had made absolutely sure that her bravery was rewarded with permanent security and profound respect. We had recognized the harsh truth of our situation, we had stood our ground together against people who believed they were untouchable, and we had unequivocally won. Marta reached out and handed me a ceramic mug. The rich, earthy aroma of dark roast coffee drifted upward, mingling with the crisp city air. I took the warm mug, wrapping my hands around the smooth ceramic surface. "Thank you, Marta," I said quietly, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet morning atmosphere. She offered a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes, a look of profound, mutual understanding that required absolutely no further explanation. She gave a slight, respectful nod and turned back toward the interior of the penthouse, leaving me to enjoy the peaceful solitude of the terrace. I turned my attention back to the sprawling cityscape stretching out toward the horizon. There were no lingering feelings of trauma, no shadows of regret, and absolutely no doubts about the path I had chosen to take. The empire of lies that Cameron and his family had built had been completely dismantled, swept away into the dustbin of history. I was no longer a silent partner or an overlooked asset. I was the founder of a highly successful consulting firm, a woman of formidable independent wealth, and a person who commanded absolute respect in every room I entered. The city below me was full of people fighting their own quiet battles, navigating their own complex webs of deceit and ambition. I had fought my war in total silence and achieved a victory that would firmly protect me for the rest of my natural life on Earth. The sun climbed higher into the bright blue sky, casting a warm golden glow across the glass facades of the surrounding skyscrapers. I raised the mug to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip of the hot coffee. The flavor was rich and perfectly bitter, grounding me entirely in the present moment. I stood alone on the expansive balcony, breathing in the unburdened air, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet, and knowing with absolute certainty that I was the ultimate architect of my own unshakable peace. People often mistake revenge for victory. They imagine the decisive moment is the public exposure, the arrest, or the instant an arrogant person finally understands the consequences of what they have done. Those moments can be satisfying, but they are not the part that changes a life. The real victory begins afterward, when fear no longer determines your decisions. It appears in the quiet ability to review a bank statement without dread, enter your own home without preparing for an argument, and build relationships that do not require you to become smaller. Independence is not measured only by money. It is measured by control over your time, your choices, and the boundaries surrounding your peace. I did not win because Cameron lost his company, or because Beatrice and Courtney lost their social standing. I won because I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. Loyalty does not require financing another person's entitlement. Compassion does not require tolerating manipulation. A marriage, a family, or a friendship that survives only when one person remains useful is not a relationship. It is an extraction system. Walking away can feel like failure when you have invested years trying to make something work. Sometimes, however, leaving is the first honest return on that investment. You recover your judgment. You recover your future. Most importantly, you recover the right to decide what enters your life and what must remain outside it. That was the life I finally built, not a monument to their destruction, but a structure strong enough that no one would ever again mistake my kindness for permission. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family expectations to build a life entirely on your own terms? Share your story of resilience in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly the inspiration someone else needs today. If you found value in this lesson, please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering content.